They told her to play the violin as a joke, but when she did, the entire room forgot how to breathe. 5th period, back row, seat by the window. That's where Leah Monroe always sat. Same quiet presence, same tired violin case resting gently between her knees like something breakable. She rarely looked up unless the teacher called her name, and, even then, her replies were barely more than a whisper. Just another quiet kid trying to disappear into the walls. But that day, she was impossible to ignore, and not in a way anyone would ever want. "All right, folks," boomed Coach Hendricks, the PE teacher who somehow got roped into running the school's upcoming talent show. "We've got open slots. Singers, dancers, magicians, whatever you got, bring it." His voice held that usual mix of sarcasm and obligation, like even he didn't know why he was announcing it. That's when Ms. Pollard, the math teacher who wore the same oatmeal-colored cardigan every day and acted like she was principal of the universe, nudged Hendricks and nodded toward Leah's desk. "What about our little violinist back there?" she said loudly, smirking so the class could hear every word. Coach chuckled without thinking. "Yeah, come on, Monroe. Let's see what that thing's been hiding all year. Might finally be worth the wait." The room cracked up. Not the cruel kind of laughter. Not at first. It slid in quietly, disguised as teasing, but Leah knew what it really was. A dare, not respect, not interest. Just a joke they didn't think she'd understand, or worse, didn't care if she did. Her grip tightened on the neck of her case. She didn't look up. Not yet. In the row ahead, someone whispered something about dying cats. Another kid made a screechy string sound, loud enough for others to pick it up. It spread fast, like spilled soda on tile. Sticky, loud, impossible to clean up. Ms. Pollard smiled, like she'd just handed out a compliment. "Just teasing, sweetheart," she added, waving it off like it was harmless. That's when Leah lifted her gaze, not at anyone, not at anything in particular, just straight ahead. "I'll do it," she said, flat, calm, like she was ordering a sandwich. The room froze. Even Coach blinked. "You serious?" Leah didn't answer, didn't have to. She simply slid her case off her lap, set it on the desk, and reached for the sign-up clipboard making its way down the row. No drama, no eye contact, just a name, Leah Monroe, on the line. Ms. Pollard let out a little laugh, but it was different this time. Thinner, like she didn't expect to feel uncertain. "Well, that's the spirit," she said with a forced smile. But behind it, a flicker of something else. Doubt. Maybe even a little regret. She hadn't thought Leah would say yes. She was supposed to shrink. The rest of the day moved on like usual. Bells ringing, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking across the linoleum. But something had shifted. Just beneath the surface. Quietly. Because the truth is, they didn't know her. Not really. They saw a quiet black girl who rarely spoke and brought a violin to school like she was trying to stand out. They didn't know about the third-floor walk-up she shared with her mom and little brother, or how she practiced with a towel shoved under her door so the neighbors wouldn't complain. They didn't know that violin wasn't just some hobby. It was hers. The one thing she had that felt completely and deeply hers. And now they were all going to see it. But just because Leah said yes didn't mean she wasn't scared. Hers wasn't the kind of name people remembered. Leah Monroe didn't echo through the halls of Easton Ridge Middle School. She wasn't loud. She didn't hover by the vending machines. She didn't snap back when someone said something slick. She just kept walking, violin case in hand, shoulders just a little too tight, like she'd learned to take up less room than she deserved. But if you followed her home, walked the 6 blocks from school, past the cracked mural near Fulton Avenue, and climbed the warped stairs to apartment 3B, you'd see someone else entirely. Not the quiet girl in the back row. The girl who lived in a hurricane of music. The case clicked open the second she shut the door behind her. No snack, no TV, just her violin, and the fading blue paint of her shared bedroom wall. From the kitchen, her mom's voice floated out. That you, baby? Yeah. You eat yet? Not hungry. You better eat. Don't make me come in there. Leah smiled, just barely. Her mom said that every night, meant it too. But she never came in. Not while Leah was playing. Carla Monroe, Leah's mom, worked nights cleaning office buildings downtown. Left around 6:30 after dinner and didn't get home until just before sunrise. Leah knew she was tired. She also knew her mom always listened, every night, from the hallway. That was their rule. No speakers, no headphones, just the raw sound. If Leah's pitch was off or her rhythm broke, her mom would tap 3 times on the wall. Start over, no shame, no scolding. Just get it right, she'd say. And Leah did. 3 gentle taps on the wall. That was the code. No judgment, no sighs. Just a quiet rule between mother and daughter. Start again. Leah didn't complain. Most nights, she played until her fingertips tingled like static. Her violin wasn't anything special. The varnish was chipped in places, and one of the pegs slipped if she turned it too far. The bow looked like it had survived more lives than it should have, its ends frayed like old shoelaces. But when she played, that instrument spoke. It wailed, it whispered, it said all the things she never could. She had picked up her first violin at age 7, too big for her hands, too loud for the neighbors. It had belonged to her grandfather Harlan, a man whose laughter had filled rooms and whose fingers once danced the blues on a battered fiddle. He passed when she was 9, but his words stayed. Let the instrument tell your truth when your mouth won't. So she did. Every day, especially after the joke. Back at school, her classmates scoffed whenever she opened her case. Some rolled their eyes. Some giggled into their sleeves like she was a walking punchline. The teachers? They gave polite nods, but never asked questions. Not until Coach Hendricks and Ms. Pollard turned her quiet into comedy. But long before they noticed her, Leah had already been working on something. A song, though she didn't call it that. It didn't have a title, didn't need one. It was part classical, part blues, all emotion, rough edges, no lyrics, just truth. She had poured everything into it, every missed opportunity, every moment she'd swallowed a comeback, every night she'd felt invisible. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was for her, a storm made of sound, wanting to prove something was easy, but stepping into the spotlight, that was different. The next morning, the talent show sign-up sheet was taped beside the front office window, right next to the vending machine that hadn't worked since last fall. A small crowd had gathered, fingers tracing the list, eyes scanning for drama. Leah's name sat at number 16. Quiet, unbothered. "Who's Leah Monroe?" someone asked, chewing the end of their pen. "That girl with the violin," another answered. "Never says anything. Probably going to play Twinkle, Twinkle and cry." Laughter again. Always laughter. But Leah didn't blink. She walked past like the hallway was empty, though every word landed and folded itself inside her. She wore the whispers like armor. At lunch, Coach Hendricks stood near the basketball court, pretending to take the whole sign-up seriously. "Talent show's Friday," he called out. "No backing out now." He spotted Leah sitting at the edge of the yard, violin in her lap, tuning it like always. "You ready, Monroe?" he asked with a smirk in his voice. Leah looked at him, blank, unreadable, not cold, not friendly. Just done. He raised an eyebrow, then looked away. Inside the teacher's lounge, Ms. Pollard nursed her coffee while flipping through a printed list of performers. Her lips curled when she reached Leah's name. "Seriously? Who let her sign up?" "She signed herself," said Ms. Grant, the art teacher, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "Same as anyone else." "It's not about fairness," Pollard muttered. "She's setting herself up. You think she's actually going to make it through a performance without freezing?" "I think," Ms. Grant replied calmly, "you might be surprised." Pollard didn't answer, but her jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being wrong. That afternoon, Leah sat on the edge of her bed, bow in hand, notebook blank in her lap. Her mom leaned against the doorway, drying her hands with a worn dish towel. "You sure about this?" Carla asked softly. Leah didn't look up. "I already said yes." Her mom walked over and sat beside her, picking up the bow. "You know you don't owe them anything, right?" she said. "You don't have to prove yourself to people who never even tried to see you." "I'm not doing it for them." "Then who?" Leah glanced up at the ceiling, eyes settling on a brown water stain above the closet. "I guess me." Carla smiled and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Then do it right." As the week passed, the whispers only grew louder. Bets were made in corners. Some kids said she'd quit. Others said she'd choke on stage. A few muttered that maybe she could actually play, but always with a snort at the end. Only one person offered her anything real. Andre, a soft-spoken seventh grader who practiced piano after school, caught up with her near the library. "You doing your own piece?" he asked. Leah blinked. "Yeah." "Good. Play something they can't compare to." She didn't smile, but she nodded. That was enough. Friday came fast. The gym was already buzzing when she arrived. Folding chairs lined up in rows, floors polished too much, the mic squeaking whenever someone tested it. Parents would show up later, but for now it was just students, teachers, and the kind of energy that comes when people expect someone to fail. One by one, the acts went up, singers, dancers, a kid who told knock-knock jokes. Some were met with claps, some just polite silence. Phones were everywhere, screens glowing, fingers ready to record anything worth laughing at later. Backstage, Leah sat with her violin across her knees, fingertips tapping on the wood like Morse code. Her number was 16. Every now and then, her eyes scanned the floor. Someone whispered, "She's up soon." She tightened her grip. She thought about her grandfather's fiddle, her mother's taps on the wall, the smell of her apartment after a long night, the towel she shoved under the door, the way Miles, her little brother, peeked through the frame and asked, "Why don't you play happy songs?" She thought about everything she didn't say that lived inside this one piece of music. Then the voice came. "Next up, Leah Monroe?" The crowd didn't react right away. A few murmurs, a shoe scraping the floor, some phones lifted, already recording. Leah stood. She didn't smile, didn't scan the crowd. She simply walked, steady and slow, toward the center of the gym. The hallway outside apartment 3B always smelled like old carpet and reheated soup. That was the scent Leah came home to every day, familiar, a little worn, and quiet, too quiet, except for the sound she made herself. Her backpack hit the floor. The violin case clicked open. No snacks, no scrolling, no distractions, just her. Her music, and the wall she shared with the neighbor who banged the ceiling if the TV was too loud. But the violin, that was different. She played the piece again, and again, over and over until the notes became muscle memory. The song had no title. It didn't need one. It began softly, like something escaping from a locked drawer. A whisper, hesitant and slow. Then came the shift. That part, the transition, was what she practiced most. Her grandfather used to say, "Drag them through something real, then give them peace." So that's what she worked toward. Barefoot on the carpet, she moved with intention. Toes curled every time she missed a note. Her hands, though small, knew the violin like an old friend. She never used sheet music. It all lived inside her, every chord, every bend, every breath. But it wasn't perfect. Her bow was splitting. The E string buzzed if she pressed too hard. The bridge leaned slightly off-center, and she had to retune the whole thing every few hours. Still, Leah never complained. In the doorway, her little brother Micah, just 6 and wide-eyed with wonder, watched her like she was casting spells. You gonna win? He asked one night, leaning on the frame. Leah shrugged, still playing. Don't know. Micah tilted his head. Why don't you play happy songs? She paused, her bow suspended mid-air. I do, she said softly. Micah frowned. They sound like crying sometimes. She gave a small smile. Happy and sad can sound the same. Depends who's listening. He didn't fully understand, but he nodded, like he did anyway, and wandered off. Later that night, just past midnight, the front door creaked open. Her mother, Carla, walked in slowly, dropping her keys on the kitchen counter. Her feet were sore. Her work uniform smelled of bleach and floor wax. You're still up? She asked, stepping around Leah, who was stretched out on the floor, Violin beside her like a sleeping pet. Almost done, Leah whispered. Carla disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a damp towel, sitting beside her daughter and gently wrapping it around her hands. You keep pushing like this, your hands'll give out. They already feel numb, Leah said, not moving. Exactly. They sat in a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of knowing each other's rhythm. You sure about tomorrow? Carla asked. Leah didn't flinch. Yeah. Carla looked at her, really looked at her. The steadiness in her eyes, the stillness in her shoulders, even while her fingers trembled. Okay then, she said softly. Make them listen. Morning came wrapped in nerves in a gray sky. Leah barely touched her toast. Her fingers were stiff, and she stretched them over and over on the walk to school. Inside Easton Ridge's gym, the floor smelled like polish and too many sneakers. Folding chairs were packed shoulder to shoulder. Classes filtered in, teachers whispering among themselves. Even the janitor had found a spot near the back. Leah peeked through the curtain. The place was full. Students, teachers, even the assistant principal, clipboard in hand. Phones were already out, screens lit. Not excitement, anticipation. Not for magic, but for failure. It wasn't exactly fear that hit her. It was heat. Her skin flushed, her stomach curled, her fingers twitched. Number 16, someone murmured backstage. That's her. The whisper felt louder than a shout. Leah sat down in the corner, violin across her knees, bow resting on top. She closed her eyes. She didn't think about Coach Hendricks or Ms. Pollard. Not the kids waiting to laugh. Not the hallway whispers or the clipboard. She thought of her mom's calloused hands wrapped in a towel, of Micah's wide eyes, of her grandfather's voice. Make them feel it. That's all she had to do. But it takes only one slip, one wrong note, one shaky breath, and everything falls apart. Then they called her name. Next up, Leah Monroe. The room didn't applaud, not right away. A few awkward claps, some coughs, a shoe squeaked on the floor. Leah stood like she was being lifted by invisible strings. One hand held her violin, the other the bow. She moved slowly onto the stage. The front row leaned forward. A few students already had their phones out. Someone nudged a friend. There was no mic, no announcement, just a cheap folding chair under a flickering light. Leah didn't sit. She didn't say a word. She lifted the violin to her chin, and then nothing. A few long seconds passed. Coach Hendricks cleared his throat. Ms. Pollard leaned forward like she was waiting for a crash. Someone whispered, "She's freezing." But then she played. The first note was fragile, barely there. It floated into the air like it was afraid of being heard. But she held it, let it bloom, stretched it long enough to fill the silence. By the fifth note, the gym was still. Not a cough, not a whisper, just Leah. The piece didn't sound like anything they knew. It wasn't from TikTok. It wasn't a cover from a movie. It was raw, original, real. Her bow moved like she was speaking through her spine. Each note a sentence, each bend a breath. It began slow, like someone trying to explain something too heavy for words. Then, right in the middle, the rhythm twisted. Her fingers climbed the strings like they were trying to escape. The melody surged, bent, cried out. Her eyes were closed, not because of nerves. She didn't need to see. Everything she had to say was coming through the strings, and they listened. She didn't need to open her eyes to know what had happened. The silence said enough. When the last note faded, Leah Monroe remained still. Bow lowered. Violin tucked close to her chest like a secret finally shared. The gym was suspended in breathless quiet. No whistles, no giggles, no jokes waiting to burst. Then, from somewhere in the back, one pair of hands began to clap. Another joined. Then a third. The sound spread slowly, like something unsure of itself, until the entire room echoed with applause. Not wild, not loud, just real. For once, they weren't clapping because they were told to. They clapped because they didn't know how not to. Some kids shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at their phones, the same phones that had been recording, ready to capture a disaster. A few lowered their screens, cheeks tinged pink with shame. In the middle row, Andre was already on his feet. One by one, others followed, even the ones who'd placed bets against her. When Leah stepped off stage, she didn't flash a victory smile. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She simply held her violin a little tighter, like it had done exactly what it came there to do. Backstage, Coach Hendricks gave her a small nod, like he wanted to say something, but couldn't quite find the words. Ms. Pollard didn't even try. She looked like she had swallowed her own voice, her eyes fixed on the floor. By the water fountain, Ms. Grant approached Leah with a quiet smile and handed her a folded slip of paper. "You did what they never expected," she whispered. "That matters." Leah slipped the note into her pocket and kept walking. Later that night, the apartment was dim and still. No TV playing in the background, just the sound of keys unlocking the front door. Carla stood there, looking at her daughter's face, and nodded once. She didn't have to ask how it went. "You played it?" "Yeah." "They listened?" Leah nodded. Carla reached out, pulled her into an embrace, and whispered against her hair. "Good. I hope they remember." But applause fades, and the real change, if it ever comes, shows up long after the last clap. Monday morning brought rain, thin and cold, like the sky was starting over. Normally, the halls of Easton Ridge were filled with lazy footsteps and half-awake chatter. But today felt different. When Leah walked through the front doors, the energy around her shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there. Heads turned, not with sarcasm, not with judgment, but with curiosity. A few kids nodded. One stepped aside to let her pass, and from the far end of the hallway, someone whispered, "That's her." It wasn't fame. It was recognition, the kind she had never asked for, but somehow earned. She passed Coach Hendricks near the lockers. He offered her an awkward thumbs up, phone still clutched in his hand. "Hey, incredible job Friday," he said. She gave him a nod. Nothing more. A few feet later, Ms. Pollard stood in her classroom doorway, a stack of quizzes in her arms. For a moment, she just looked at Leah, like she was trying to unlearn the version of her she'd carried for too long. "Leah," she said, careful and slow, "can I speak with you a moment?" Leah stopped, but didn't step closer. Pollard hesitated. "I want to apologize. What I said last week, it wasn't fair. I assumed things I shouldn't have. I'm still learning." Leah could have said something sharp, something that had been building in her chest since the day they made her into a joke. Instead, she met the teacher's eyes and replied calmly, "You should have seen me before Friday." Pollard blinked. The words landed heavier than any insult would have. Leah turned and kept walking. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was just done being unseen. In the cafeteria, Andre slid her a carton of chocolate milk without a word. She raised an eyebrow. "Next time," he said, "we're doing a duet." She gave a rare smirk, leaned back in her seat, and muttered, "You're not ready." And for the first time, maybe ever, she laughed. Not loud, not forced, just real. A few heads turned. The sound surprised them. Most had never heard her voice in any form, but now it was unmistakable. At home that evening, the violin stayed in its case. Leah didn't touch it. She sat beside Micah on the couch, watching cartoons with the volume off. Her mom peeked around the kitchen doorway. "You not practicing?" "Not tonight," Leah said. "You good?" Leah thought for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." Not everyone who clapped that day meant it. Not everyone who stood felt changed. But some did. And sometimes that's enough to begin something new. Because there will always be people who won't see you until you make them listen. So speak, even if your voice trembles, even if it isn't a voice at all. Let your truth make noise. Let them hear you.